Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. I hope you guys are all happy and well. Do me a favor, please hit that like button. It's a free way you can help me. I really appreciate it. Let's dig in. If there's any hero or shero or most valuable player in the Dylan Rounds case so far, it has to be Dylan's mother, Candice Cooley. I don't care what people think about Candice and her financial woes. She's been her son's mightiest advocate since the day the family realized 19-year-old Dylan was missing. And this case should be about Dylan, not about his parents, not about their divorce, not about their financial backgrounds. It should just be about Dylan. Just in case you don't recall the specifics, Dylan Rounds went missing on Saturday, May 28th, out in the remote desert town of Lucin, Utah, under suspicious circumstances. Unfortunately, Dylan's family as a whole did not realize that Dylan was missing until the afternoon of Monday, May 30th. It was Labor Day weekend, so people were probably at parties, at home relaxing, but once the family members heard that Dylan had not been in touch with anyone in the family or with his best friend, JD, they all got into their cars and drove straight to Dylan's 640-acre farm. Both Dylan's mother, Candice Cooley, and his father, Justin Rounds, were part of that caravan to Lucin. Fast forward 5 months to today, and Dylan Rounds remains missing. His parents, Candice and Justin, have been advocating to get the case removed from the hands of the Box Elder Sheriff's Office. Box Elder has done a smashing job of pretty much messing up the investigation from day one. It's understandable why Candice and Justin are so adamant that another agency take over as lead investigators on Dylan's case. Candice and Justin recently appeared on East Idaho News and on a number of other YouTube channels, including Heavy D Sparks and the Diesel Brothers and Duty Ron, and they were there to plead their case. They also clarified once and for all why there were so many conflicting details about the case in the beginning. And most importantly, they shared new details about the crime that helped paint a clearer picture of what actually went down on Saturday, May 28th, when Dylan vanished, and during the first week or so afterward. Note that I've noticed that Candice sometimes mixes up the days when talking on the various channels about the first week after they discovered that Dylan was missing. No doubt she's tired from having to do all this advocating and arranging of drones while continuing to work. This lady is amazing, and I'm thinking her ex, Justin Rounds, has newfound respect for her. How could he not, as he watches her fight for justice for their son? Candice made 3 bombshell statements during these interviews. The first one is that she knows that Jim Brenner committed the crime all by himself, and that it went down at the grain shed. That is based on evidence found at that location when the family arrived on the Monday after Dylan disappeared. The second bombshell is that Candice believes 100% that Jim Brenner had help, not in the commission of the crime, but rather in covering it up, as in hiding the evidence, including hiding Dylan. And from what I've inferred from Candice's words, she thinks that it's likely that Dylan's neighbor and sometimes farmhand Don Hatley, who most likely helped Brenner. Candice and Justin also said that they believe Dylan is in a wash out in Lucin in a certain area. Jim Brenner has told multiple people, apparently, that if you want to hide someone, the best place is in a wash. And the tire wells of Dylan's F-150 truck had mud caked on them on that Monday when the family arrived. This would only have happened if the truck was driven in the rain. And it had only rained in Lucin on Saturday and Sunday. On the weekend, Dylan vanished. It hadn't rained before that for a very long time. Per Candice, despite she and Justin begging Box Elder to check out that area of the wash, they haven't done it. So that's a spot the family will be asking Heavy D and the Diesel brothers to check out with EquiSearch's new high-tech drone. When it comes to what Candice is saying about Brenner and Don Hatley, I want to use the word allegedly, because Don Hatley has not been named a suspect in Dylan's case, nor has he been charged with any crime. And although Jim Brenner has been named a suspect, he's not been charged either. The third bombshell is that, per Candice, significant evidence was found in the grain shed, and that evidence is something that the family will not share with us, the public. When Nate Eaton asked Candice and Justin if Dylan had any enemies, Justin Rounds piped up to say that Jim Brenner was jealous of Dylan. Justin knows this because he captured Brenner on a surveillance camera at Justin's farm in Idaho Falls. Apparently, Justin had hired Brenner to do some work for him, and Brenner didn't know that he was in a space with a security camera that also picks up audio. Justin heard Brenner talking disparagingly about Dylan, so Justin warned Dylan that Brenner really wasn't his friend, but Dylan just laughed it off, saying, "Oh, that's just Jim." Too bad Dylan didn't listen to his dad and take his advice to stay away from Brenner. Farmhand Don Hatley also had issues with Dylan. He and Dylan had fought weeks before Dylan vanished about a washing machine. Candice gave Dylan a washing machine, and while Dylan was working to get it all set up, Don Hatley was in the fields working on Dylan's pivot. Apparently, Hatley thought that Dylan should be in the field with him working on that and not trying to get the washer set up. And the argument was so bad that Dylan fired Hatley. So you could say that Brenner and Hatley had some motive to harm Dylan. Neither one of them liked the young 19-year-old farmer. Candice and Justin said that only about 3 people live in the vicinity of Dylan's farm. They also made it clear that Dylan never really moved to Lucin. He mostly lived at his grandparents', Larry and Karen Rounds' house. So Dylan only went to Lucin when he had work to do for other ranchers and when he was finally ready to plant his first crop of triticale. So it's possible, actually it was triticale, sorry. So it's possible that Dylan had never before parked his grain truck in that grain shed. Candice Cooley explained that she and Justin were never told by law enforcement to keep any of the details about Dylan's disappearance confidential. Instead, they as a family, after seeing how little the Box Elder Sheriff's Office had been doing in terms of an investigation, decided to keep things they knew about the crime under wraps. But now, again feeling that Box Elder is doing nothing to move Dylan's case forward, Candice and Justin have decided to share more about what they know about Dylan's disappearance. Things like, was Dylan's phone found or wasn't it? Who put Dylan's boots behind the dirt pile? Things like that. In this video, I'm going to synthesize the new details that were shared on these 3 shows. If you're unfamiliar with the Dylan Rounds case, you might want to go to my Dylan Rounds playlist and watch those videos before watching this one. For those of you who've been following the case all along, let's dig in. I'm going to start where the case begins, and that is the night of Friday, May 27th, 2022. That's when Dylan was planting triticale, never get that right, triticale seed all night on his farm. Dylan's phone data proves this, as Dylan's phone was pinging there on the 640 acres that night. We also know that neighbors came forward to say that they saw the light from Dylan's tractor out in the fields after dark on Friday night. Next, we jump to the early morning of Saturday, May 28th. That's when Dylan phoned his grandmother, Karen Rounds, at 6:51 a.m. We already knew that, but here's the kicker that we weren't privy to. Candice and Justin said that the data from Dylan's cell phone show that he made that call to Grandma Karen Rounds roughly in the area where the locked gate to the grain shed property is located. Thus, Dylan phoned his grandma from his grain truck, and he probably dialed her up as he was parked near the locked gate. Remember, Dylan needed to get past that locked gate to get to the grain shed, and the keeper of the key to that property was Jim Brenner. Brenner was squatting on the grain shed property, living in an abandoned trailer. Although Brenner didn't own the property, he was pretty much treating it as if it belonged to him. Brenner is the person who put up the locked gate. The actual owner of the grain shed property lives in another state, and he goes by the initials JC. And he'd given Dylan permission to park his grain truck in the shed whenever it rained. According to Candice Cooley, Jim Brenner put the gate up to keep a wild horse that he had trained within the confines of the grain shed property. Now, that detail differs from what Dylan's friend, Montello local Kurt Wadsworth, has said. Wadsworth claims he bought Brenner that horse. I'm not sure if any of this matters, though, unless it points to someone not being honest or someone not sticking to the facts. Let's move on. So Dylan called his grandma at 6:51 a.m. and during that early morning call, Dylan promised her that he would call her later in the afternoon. According to Dylan's cell phone data, right after he hung up from Grandma, he called Jim Brenner. It's most likely that Dylan was calling Brenner to ask him to come and unlock the gate so that he could save the seed in his truck from getting wet. It sounds like Brenner maybe didn't answer the phone, and Dylan, frantic to get his grain under cover, maybe drove his grain truck over the flimsy gate. That's always been my theory about this case, that it was about that gate. The pings from Dylan's phone indicate that Dylan likely made it to the grain shed. I'm guessing that Dylan maybe pulled up to the grain shed around maybe 6:55 a.m. And I'm going to speculate now based on those phone ping locations. Perhaps Jim Brenner, who is well known to abuse alcohol, namely beer, as evidenced by all the discarded beer cans inside the grain shed property, was still in his trailer sleeping, or maybe he heard Dylan park the seed truck and came out of his trailer knowing that he'd not unlocked the gate, or maybe Dylan was shouting at this point out of frustration that Brenner didn't answer the phone or open the gate. No one other than Jim Brenner really knows what happened after Dylan made that final call. Either way, it sounds like a fight went down at the grain shed. And I do recall hearing that an area of dirt there appeared to show evidence of a struggle, as in footprints showing a struggle in the dust. Perhaps that's when Dylan's boots came off. Candice went on to explain that Dylan's phone pinged at the grain shed property Saturday morning. Then it pinged over at Dylan's farm. Then it pinged back at the grain shed. And then the final ping was over near the Lucin Pond at around 2:30 p.m. And again, that was on Saturday. It's Candice's belief that Brenner was the person who had Dylan's phone after whatever went down at the grain shed early that morning. Per Candice, Jim Brenner later told the authorities that he headed to Don Hatley's barbecue at around 2:30 p.m. that Saturday. Candice believes that Brenner took the back route to Hatley's place, a route only Brenner was known to take, and that route just so happened to go past the Lucin Pond. And apparently Brenner told the authorities that he stopped by the Lucin Pond before he went to Don Hatley's barbecue, so Brenner placed himself at the pond. And here's another new fact. Dylan's phone was found, yes, it was found, on June 18th in the Lucin Pond. That would have been 21 days after Dylan went missing. That's a long time. So now we know once and for all that Dylan's phone was found. That's one detail that the family tried to keep a secret in the beginning, and Candice even lied about it. My theory is that Brenner likely discarded Dylan's phone in that pond as he drove to Don Hatley's barbecue that day. Per Candice, when Dylan's cell phone was found on June 18th in the pond, Justin Rounds was there watching. The detective who was called to the area, Detective Blower, removed the phone from the pond. When the phone was later analyzed by the authorities, it had no oil on it, and I believe this means that the phone had no fingerprints on it. Being in that water for so long may have played a role in there being no oil on it. Another blunder by Box Elder. They should have looked in the Lucin Pond much earlier because of that ping. By the way, Robert Aviles was also out there with the police at that time when the phone was found because he was telling the police where Chase Venstra allegedly got on a four-wheeler on Saturday. Aviles saw the phone being recovered, and that's how the information got leaked. Candice said that Detective Blower had been told not to remove the phone from the pond, but he did it anyways. Apparently, phones in water, when associated with a crime, are supposed to be left in the water long enough to allow the digital forensic evidence stored in them to be accessed. Only after that should the phone be removed from the water. According to a retired crime scene detective from New York City named Ed Wallace, who appears on the Duty Ron show, if you take a wet object out of the water and place it in a plastic bag, mold will begin to grow on it and wreck the investigators' chances of getting evidence off of it. And here's what I read about phones in water when it comes to crime cases. Note that I found this information in a white paper entitled Forensic Analysis of Water-Damaged Mobile Devices, and that article was on the ScienceDirect.com website. I'll leave a link to the article in the description for any of you geeks out there like me who like learning about this stuff. Here's basically what part of the article said, and I quote, "If handled properly and appropriate procedures are conducted at a forensic lab, there's a high chance of restoring the water-damaged mobile device to operating status to conduct successful forensic data recovery." End quote. The white paper later said this, and again I quote, "Furthermore, while the standard procedure for a water-damaged device calls for immediate transportation to a lab while keeping the device in the same liquid in which it was found. In reality, confiscated, water-damaged devices are left in the liquid for a long time before actual transportation happens. Given the nature of galvanic corrosion, this wait time could lead to more damage to a target device. End quote. Back to the weekend Dylan went missing. When Dylan's grandma, Karen Rounds, didn't hear back from Dylan all day Saturday and into Sunday morning, she called farmhand Don Hatley on Sunday morning and asked him to do a wellness check on Dylan at his farm. Note that Hatley lives 6 miles from Dylan's farm. Hatley allegedly called Karen from Dylan's farm once he got there, and in real time, supposedly, he told Karen that everything looked fine. Jim Brenner was also allegedly with Hatley for this wellness check. Hatley appears to have maybe played down any potential problem, and he reassured Karen that Dylan would likely turn up soon. This led Karen to ignore her gut and not dial 911. On the morning of Monday, May 30th, Karen Rounds called Dylan's best friend, JD, and she asked him if he knew where Dylan was. Well, JD hadn't heard from Dylan either, so JD then called Dylan's mother, Candice Cooley. As soon as Candice heard that Dylan hadn't been in touch with anyone in the family or JD, she and her husband, along with Dylan's father, Justin Rounds, and other family members, drove from Idaho Falls to Lucin, Utah, to look for Dylan. Once at the Lucin farm, they found Dylan's camper and his Ford F-150 truck locked. Dylan never locked anything. He was a creature of habit. So this hinted to the family that something was off. The family then broke into Dylan's Ford truck by smashing the back window. They were looking for Dylan's guns as well as the key fob to the F-150 truck. None of those items were in the truck, nor were they found in Dylan's camper. Only later did they learn from Dylan's grandparents that Dylan's rifle was back in Idaho Falls at their home, but that still didn't account for where Dylan's handgun was. The grandparents then drove to Lucin to bring the spare key fob to the F-150 truck. Sometime on Monday, Dylan's family called the Box Elder Sheriff's Office to report Dylan missing. The police and a search and rescue team came out to assist the family. About an hour and a half into the search, Dylan's boots were found behind a dirt pile that was about 200 to 300 yards from the trailer where Jim Brenner was squatting. We already knew this. Candice said Dylan's boots had no dust on them, nor did they show any signs of rain damage. They did, however, have a spot of blood on them. We know that it rained all afternoon on Saturday and all day Sunday. So if those boots had been out there behind that dirt pile the whole time, they would have had stains on them from the rain. These boots are apparently, they have an untreated leather on them, so they get stains easily. When Candice and Justin spoke to Brenner that Monday, he told them that he hadn't seen Dylan in more than a month. He also claimed that he hadn't seen Dylan on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or even Monday, for that matter. And Brenner was partially telling the truth. Per Candice, Dylan had worked the previous month out at Dan Iverson's ranch and at the Wine Cup Gamble Ranch in Montello. Dylan had really only shown back up in Montello and Lucin a few days before he went missing. That part was true. What wasn't true, if we are to believe what Candice and Justin are saying, was that Jim Brenner had seen Dylan on Saturday morning when he allegedly committed the crime leading to Dylan's disappearance. Candice said that Brenner must have put Dylan's boots out behind the dirt pile a few hours before she and Justin arrived at the grain shed property that Monday, or it's possible he put them there when they arrived. And I have to agree. I think that it never occurred to Jim Brenner how fast Dylan's family would realize that something was wrong with Dylan out in Lucin. Brenner maybe didn't realize that Dylan kept in contact with either someone in his family or JD every day. Brenner, who doesn't seem to have any loved ones who have come forward to see him in jail, maybe could not conceive of a family away in Idaho Falls noticing that something was wrong with their loved one in Lucin. I think Brenner forgot to dispose of Dylan's boots when he disposed of, well, Dylan, and he thought he'd have more time to get rid of them. Remember, Dylan hadn't been out to Lucin for about a month before he went missing, so Brenner wasn't seeing a lot of cars out there or people. Also, someone said they noticed signs of that struggle in the dirt. I'm wondering if Brenner was dragging Dylan and Dylan's boots came off, perhaps in putting Dylan on his horse or in a vehicle. Brenner failed to grab the boots. Maybe Brenner thought he had plenty of time to dispose of the boots. So then on Monday afternoon, when he noticed the dust stirring in the distance and saw vehicles driving down the dirt road to Dylan's farm, he might have panicked, grabbed the boots from his trailer, and scurried over to that dirt pile to hide them behind it as a temporary solution. He took the time to put the boots behind the dirt pile, so he was making some effort to hide them, and he also would not have wanted to take them inside his trailer for fear of maybe Dylan's DNA getting inside the trailer. Remember, the land in most of Lucin is flat, so even though Dylan's farm is 5 miles away from the grain shed property, Brenner would have been able to see vehicles and people over at Dylan's farm in the distance. According to Candice, Brenner has confessed to police that he's the person who put the boots behind the dirt pile. So now we know the mystery of how the boots got there. Brenner said he found the boots and put them by his trailer, and then when Dylan failed to show up to get his boots, Brenner took the boots over to the dirt pile. It's likely that Brenner knew that when Dylan's boots were found, they'd be taken to a lab for analysis, and so he needed to come up with a benign explanation for why his DNA might be found on those boots. Maybe you can't wipe clean a pair of leather boots like that. Per Candice, on Tuesday, May 31st, she and the rest of the family were back at Dylan's farm and at the grain shed property where the Box Elder police detectives had set up some sort of base camp. But when Brenner complained to the police that they were disturbing him, the police told the family that they, along with the police, would need to decamp to another location. Candice cannot understand, and neither can I, why Box Elder cared if Brenner was disturbed, and why they didn't just arrest him on the spot because they knew he had an outstanding felony warrant for his arrest for an incident in which Brenner almost did another man in. And by the way, Jim Brenner had no rights to be on that property, so why did Box Elder cater to the squatter who had Dylan's boots near his trailer and who is now their one and only suspect in the case? So after the family and the police moved to another base camp, which I believe was at the Lucin Pond, they noticed Brenner cleaning in the grain shed. Candice said she witnessed Brenner come out with 4 bags of garbage and put them in a truck. I'm thinking it was Dylan's grain truck because Candice also saw Brenner get into Dylan's grain truck, which had not been processed yet for potential evidence, and drive it out of the shed. Note that retired Detective Ed Wallace then asked Candice if Brenner had permission to drive Dylan's grain truck, and she said no. Wallace followed that with the question, why wasn't Brenner arrested for that? And Candice didn't have an answer because she was just as perplexed by it. Why didn't Box Elder arrest him? Ed Wallace also stated that Box Elder is guilty of dereliction of duty for not arresting Brenner when they knew he had an outstanding felony warrant for a violent crime. The grain shed where Brenner was cleaning is likely where all the evidence was, so it sounds like Brenner may have been getting rid of that as the police and the family watched him. But I must also add, Jim Brenner hasn't been charged in connection to Dylan's disappearance, and although he's been named a suspect, and although he looks sus as all heck, he may not be the perpetrator. Another new detail that Candice shared was that Dylan's handgun was found during the first week. You may recall that she previously denied this. Here's how the family found it. On Wednesday or Thursday, Candice has said both days in different interviews, and she also said on Heavy D Sparks' channel that the key fob was returned to Dylan's camper before the handgun. I think it's hard for her to keep stuff like this straight because she has so much on her mind, and she's probably tired every single day. But let me get back to Wednesday, June 1st. Candice said that when they went into Dylan's camper and into the bathroom, they discovered Dylan's handgun on the counter. Next to it was the gun's clip. Candice and Justin are adamant that the gun was not there on Monday or Tuesday, so someone had to have secretly come in the night, gone into the camper, and returned the handgun. Candice also stated that the police and the family took photos of the interior of Dylan's camper on Monday, so they know for sure that gun wasn't there during those first 2 days. Dylan's little brother is the person who bagged the gun because he was smart enough to know there might be fingerprints on it as well as other DNA material. Note that Box Elder did not immediately put crime scene tape around Dylan's camper at this point, and they did not declare that Dylan's disappearance was due to foul play. Candice then implied, at least that's how it came off to me, that Dylan's friend Kurt Wadsworth may have had something to do with getting the family away from Lucin that Wednesday so that someone could return Dylan's gun, because that's the day Kurt called them to say that Dylan was being held hostage in a home in Montello. After Kurt's call, Candice told some of the Box Elder detectives who were over at the Lucin Pond about Wadsworth's phone call and the alleged abduction, and per Candice, they replied, "Good luck with that," and did nothing. This was likely because Montello is in Nevada, and thus it falls under the jurisdiction of the Elko County Sheriff's Office. So the family headed straight to Montello to track down the house where Kurt said Dylan was being held. Obviously, they alerted Elko County as well. Of course, anyone who's been following this case already knows about the abduction story, but I'm not sure if everyone knows that Candice believes Kurt might have created that abduction tale as a diversion so that someone else could return Dylan's gun. Now let me just insert that I don't really believe that. I think Kurt Wadsworth was sincere and he believed in the psychic's readings. According to Candice, the next day on Thursday, June 2nd, upon entering Dylan's camper and his bathroom, the family was surprised once again. This time Dylan's missing key fob to the F-150 truck was on the counter in nearly the same location where the gun had been found. Once again, someone had made a secret nocturnal visit to Dylan's camper, this time to return the key fob. We've heard how incredibly dark it is out in Lucin at night. They don't have street lights out there, so it's plausible that someone could sneak over to Dylan's farm, go into his camper, and put those items back without being seen. And to me, this points once again to Jim Brenner not realizing how quickly Dylan's family would find out he was missing. Brenner hadn't returned the items yet because he didn't realize the family and police would be swarming Dylan's farm on Monday. That's me speculating, but I think it makes sense. According to Candice, the only two people who could have pulled off these two secret trips to the camper were Jim Brenner and Don Hatley. Candice also stated on both East Idaho News and Duty Ron that she believes someone helped Brenner cover up the crime, and although she didn't say it, I got the feeling that someone most likely was Don Hatley. I could be wrong, but that's the impression I got. Candice also said that when the investigators analyzed the handgun and the key fob, they found nothing on them because both items had been wiped clean. But Ed Wallace of Duty Ron's channel chimed in to say that there are some tiny crevices on these objects where tiny particles of DNA may still be lurking. So I'm hoping that Duty Ron hooks Candice up with the right experts who can look to see if there's any DNA still on those objects. On Thursday, June 2nd, the police and Dylan's family noticed that Jim Brenner was doing a lot of cleaning in that grain shed. That was the day Candice noticed the 4 garbage bags coming out of the shed and being put into the grain truck. Friday, June 3rd is also the day that the Weber Search and Rescue Team from Utah told Dylan's parents that they would not be coming back to the area to continue searching for Dylan. And they also said that Box Elder would not be coming back either. So this is when Candice knew that she and Justin and the rest of the family were on their own, and they needed to arrange for other volunteer searchers to come and help them in that vast desert. And Candice and Justin jumped straight into action. The next day, Saturday, June 4th, 300 to 400 people went out to Lucin to look for Dylan. I want to also mention that Friday, June 3rd is also the day that Brenner and Hatley took a road trip to Wendover, Nevada. Candice and Justin are concerned that the two men may have dumped evidence, including those 4 garbage bags Brenner came out with from the grain shed, along the route to Wendover. And on Sunday, June 5th, Candice asked Box Elder if it would be okay to take Dylan's F-150 truck back to Idaho Falls. Per Candice, the detective replied, "You folks do what you gotta do." Note that Dylan's burgundy Ford truck had not yet been processed by the authorities, as in analyzed for fingerprints, DNA, etc. Candice and Justin aren't detectives. It didn't occur to them that the truck needed to be processed, and Box Elder apparently had zero plans to do their job on that truck. Candice and Justin were thinking that they would take the truck home and install GPS for tracking and then return it to Dylan's farm and wait and see if Brenner and Hatley drove it anywhere that could lead them to Dylan. It sounds like they never got a chance to do that, however, because at some point the investigators did seize the Ford truck for processing. Box Elder was also telling volunteer search group EquiSearch Midwest that they could not come out to Lucin and fly a drone. By the way, Box Elder apparently doesn't have the authority to prevent anyone from doing that. The only place the drone cannot be flown is in the airspace near the military shooting base out there. Later on, Box Elder said they'd allow a very high-tech drone that EquiSearch Midwest was able to buy using monies from a fundraiser that Duty Ron did, and Box Elder told Candice that they would provide the drone operator. However, a day before the drone was supposed to be flown, the supposed operator, called Candice to say that he'd failed his certification test and he could not operate the drone. Candice, once again, lost all trust in Box Elder. And this is when Candice and EquiSearch Midwest decided it would be better for the family to find their own drone operator. And that's how Heavy D Sparks and the Diesel brothers ended up again in Lucin. He and his buddies flew the drone. EquiSearch Midwest's expert drone image analyzer, a guy named Gene, is currently scouring those images. According to Candice, Box Elder has not been back out to Dylan's farm since June 20th, when they finally arrested Jim Brenner for that outstanding felony warrant. In her opinion, Box Elder is doing zero investigating at this point, and they're just waiting for Jim Brenner to squeal.